4. 1. The Pier. After I broke up with my girlfriend, I started taking long walks to fill in the time. You know how it is. You're in your late 20s and your friends are all married and starting families, and all the people you work with are middle-aged. A lot of the places I used to hang out seemed to have closed down. So I just started walking. It's free, it's good for you, and like I said, it fills in the time. I always seem to end up at the lake. There is a pier there, with a lighthouse extending out into the dark waters, and I'd always have to take a turn on it. Sometimes I'd just sit there at the very end, the very edge, and dangle my feet over the dark water as I tried to find a way out of my current situation. This one particular night, I reached the pier after midnight, when there was no one around. I walked out to the end, and when I got there, I couldn't help thinking, if only for an instant, that drowning was one answer to my loneliness. I heard a splash, then a plop, and then this thing came up out of the lake. It was a humanoid, sopping wet, with bloated, chalky white features and limbs, and covered all over with seaweed. It opened its mouth with this kind of growl and splattered the ground with a shower of water and vomit. The stench was terrible. It staggered towards me, still groaning, and I reacted instinctively. I thrust out my hands and pushed it away with all my force, pushed it so hard it stumbled over the edge, striking the water with another loud splash. I ran forward to look over the side, and the thing was back, clawing at the side of the pier, trying to pull itself out of the water. I think its hands, its fingers were webbed. I stomped on them, stomped and stomped and stomped while the thing bellowed, stomped till it finally let go and slid back into the black. I think it was gone for good. I think. I ran from that place, ran all the way home, and when a few days later I got a job offer in Western Canada, I took it. There's no water on the prairies, eh? 2. The Cemetery. When I woke up, I had no idea where I was. All I knew was that I was lying in wet grass and felt like crap. Slowly, gingerly, I raised my aching head and, squinting my eyes, took a look around. I was in the cemetery. The boneyard. I had no idea how I got there. That must have been some party. Still, there was nothing for it now but to go home. I got up and stumbled out onto the road out in front and began moving in the direction of home. My phone was gone, so I had no idea what time it was. It was then I saw a guy stumbling towards me. He looked vaguely familiar, but I had to squint hard. There was something wrong with my bloody eyes. I had to squint hard before I recognized him as a dude I knew well. And he sure looked like he had a skin on. He was dead drunk. I called out to him, "Hey! Hey!" It came out funny. What happened next was funny too. The dude took one look at me, screamed, and then fell back on his ass. It was too funny. I started to laugh, but the sound came out like I was gargling. I noticed the dude had pissed his pants, which cracked me up even more. And the whole time the guy kept yelling, You! 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 What's the matter with you? I finally managed to slur out. You're dead! He shrieked. We buried you 3 days ago! And with that, he jumped up and took to his heels. Oh. Crap. I turned around and went back. What else could I do? 3. The judge. And you will be put to death by lethal injection. Of course, the man under sentence had a tantrum and began screaming, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. Oh, why don't you believe me? It was this thing, this monster, this werewolf. He actually charged the bench, but he didn't get far. He was still screaming as they dragged him out, acting as insane as the defense tried to paint him. No doubt there would be an appeal. His girlfriend killed by a werewolf. What a joke. My clerk followed me into chambers to ask if there was anything else I needed, but I dismissed him rather curtly. I wanted to be alone. I needed to be alone. And once I was alone, I stripped off my judicial robes. I had been naked underneath. I went to the window overlooking the now empty parking lot and opened it, pulling back the curtains to allow the light from the newly risen full moon to stream into the room, and I waited. I waited. Tonight some poor person would die, and some poor innocent fool would be condemned for the crime, possibly by me. Oh well, most human beings were expendable. Suddenly, the transformation started. My body was racked by the most exquisite pain as my form twisted, as a tail sprouted from my buttocks, as my nose elongated into a snout, my ears became pointed, my teeth became fangs, and my eyes burned redly. As a werewolf, I dived through the open window, not knowing about the dumpster that had been placed there earlier in the day. The fall knocked me out, and an hour later, I was compacted. My disappearance has never been solved. 4. The movie. Jay loved old horror films, especially the ones from the 1950s, which he regarded as the golden age of B-movies. And so he would sit up until the wee small hours of the morning, sitting at his dining room table and watching vintage movies on his laptop. Thus, Jay was delighted when his YouTube recommends turned up a movie he'd never heard of. The Watching Dead. Not The Walking Dead, The Watching Dead. Jay clicked on the thumbnail, which showed a darkened movie theater. The film had been made by an unknown company and featured actors equally unknown. The director was a stranger too. As well, it was awfully short for a feature film. It wasn't even an hour. Oh well, no great investment of time. The opening scene showed the interior of a darkened movie theater, which made Jay think of such B-movie classics as The Blob or The Tingler. The Tingler. A fat guy with glasses and wearing a shirt and tie. Hey, it was the 1950s. Took a seat and began scarfing down popcorn. No doubt buttered popcorn. But he didn't scarf long, as a hand holding a large hunting knife, came out of the darkness behind him and slit his throat, splattering the screen with black blood. Hey, it was a black and white film. Splattering the screen with blood. At the same moment, something grabbed Jay's head from behind and pulled it back as a hand holding a large hunting knife came out of the darkness and cut his throat. Did you know that when someone cuts your windpipe, it makes a whistling noise? That was the last thing Jay ever heard. But he didn't hear it for long. 5. The Pier, Part 2. I was desperate for a job, which is why I agreed to work as a deckhand on a Great Lakes freighter. Early in the evening, we sailed out of Toronto Harbor, bound for the exotic port of Buffalo. Yeah. I was standing at the rail, gazing out at the lights on shore, and wishing I was on shore too, when a gust of wind blew my cap off. It was a brand new designer Vegas Golden Knights baseball cap, and I'd paid a lot of money for it. I instinctively reached out for it and fell overboard into the lake. I seemed to go down forever, and God, that water was cold. When I finally managed to make my way back to the surface, the ship was hundreds of yards away and would have shuffled off all the way to Buffalo before they discovered I was missing. The shore didn't seem that far away. A mile, maybe. In any event, I had no choice but to swim for it. I was in the water for hours and nearly drowned a dozen times, but I finally made it to this little pier and managed to climb up. There was this dude there who looked totally shocked the instant he saw me. I'd already crapped my pants and then I threw up all over the place. But I no sooner recovered when you know what the dude did? He pushed me. He pushed me back into the water. And when I tried to crawl back up, he started stomping on my fingers. Stomping on them. I could actually hear them breaking. I screamed for him to stop, but he wouldn't stop. He was trying to kill me. And he did. I slid back under the black water, too exhausted to fight. And as I drowned, my last thought was, I wonder where my cap ended up. Casting the Runes. 4 short vignettes. I have to get home quick, Danny thought. My parents will kill me if they find I was out at 4 a.m. At 18 years old, Danny was tired of her parents' rules, but she knew better than to flaunt them openly. And so she snuck out of the house after dark to hook up with Jay. Jay, who was now sound asleep, as Danny made her way through the haunted Luffert Woods. They said the woods were haunted as a young woman was murdered there, torn to pieces years ago, and supposedly a number of people had gone missing there as well. Danny had always given the woods a wide berth, but the path through them was the quickest way home. And it was 4:13 a.m. She had to take it. Ouch! Danny had stubbed her toe on something. What, a tree root? A rock? Teach me to wear flip-flops rather than sneakers. As she paused to rub her sore toe, Danny heard a noise from somewhere behind her. Was someone else in the woods with her? Danny stared into the darkness. What was that? A flash of white. Was it the moon? No, No, it was nothing. Nothing she could see clearly. Danny continued down the path, hurrying now. Was it starting to get light out? Hurrying while trying not to trip. But she hadn't gone very far when she heard it again, a slight rustling noise, as if something was moving through the bushes. Danny stared into the darkness. Was there really something there? She could make out a patch of gray. Was there someone or something standing there? Danny slipped off her flip-flops and began to walk barefoot in case she had to run. Oh, why did I have to sneak out tonight? And Jay, he could have come with me. The Lufford woods had gone completely still. Quiet. Too quiet. And then a twig snapped. Danny turned, sure there was something there. Hello? In the dead quiet, her voice sounded really loud and really scared. A tree stood along the side of the path, not far from where she stood. And as she watched, a long, thin white hand with incredibly long nails or claws curved around the tree trunk, followed by the appearance of a white, bullet-shaped head with glowing pink eyes, and then a white humanoid stepped out onto the path and was staring at her. Danny turned and ran, wetting her jeans in sheer terror. She took a quick glance over her shoulder and... Danny was never found. What are the night floaters? Floating heads, aka night floaters or floaters, are an anomalous phenomena reported from various places in Canada and throughout North America. The name refers to the ability of certain individuals to detach their heads from the trunks of their bodies, the heads then being able to fly or float at will. They are said to attack unsuspecting victims, biting them and sometimes even killing them. Back in '89, John was home from university for the summer. He heard there was to be a bush party out at the old silo off the 4th line, so he decided to check it out. There was sure to be someone he knew there. John knew better than to take a car out there, where the ground was little better than a rough farm field, and so he decided to hoof it, the train tracks being the quickest and most direct route. It was a warm evening in early August, a perfect night for a walk, and Sirius the dog star was already visible in the twilight sky. John found his mind wandering, and for some strange reason, he began thinking of the boogeyman. Okay, boogie people of his youth, the night floaters. The night floaters, the disembodied flying heads that would peep in your bedroom window at night or follow you after dark or could they kill you? John didn't know, didn't remember. All he knew was that he was terrified of them throughout his childhood and always kept his curtains closed after dark. John cast a quick look behind him to see if a train might be on the horizon. When, what the hell? He was being trailed by a skinny young woman in cutoffs and tube top and no head. John stopped dead. It must be a trick of the light. She had to have a head. She had to. But she didn't. She was actually headless. Headless and mobile. In fact, she was running now, running after him. John didn't wait around for an introduction, but took off down the tracks, stifling the urge to yell, and looking behind, only to find she was gaining on him. John thought fast. He was coming to a bend in the tracks where he would be out of sight of his pursuer. Although, how she could see him or follow him without eyes, without a head, he didn't know or care. He just wanted to get away. North of the tracks lay an abandoned field of weeds and waist-high grass, and John dived in and hid himself, crouching low to the ground. From his hiding place, he watched the headless woman hurry past and disappear out of sight. John continued to crouch in his hiding place, nerving himself to return to the tracks and head for home. No partying for him tonight. But John suddenly had the creepy feeling he was being watched. Slowly, he turned his head to find another head, a female head, floating in midair and staring at him with reddish glowing eyes. It had a thin, pale, acne-scarred face with chapped grayish lips, and as John started back in horror, it suddenly swung towards him, butting heads with him. John cried out in pain, and then the thing kissed him, darting a slimy tongue into his mouth. He drew back in disgust, and the head bit off his nose. When John's corpse was eventually discovered, it was so badly decomposed, no cause of death could ever be ascertained. P.S. The night floaters are also known for their ability to animate their bodies. Animate their bodies minus their heads. Roman woke up in the wee small hours of the morning. "What time is it?" he mumbled. A voice in the night answered, "It's 4:13 a.m. Being a polite Canadian, Roman automatically said, "Thank you." Then, "What the hell?" You see, Roman was home alone. Warren and Dr. Curious went out for a drive in the car. Sadly, Warren said, "I've run out of M.R. James stories to adapt for YouTube." In answer, Dr. Curious said, "Well, get him to write more." "That's impossible," Warren said with some annoyance. "He's been dead since 1936. To which Dr. Curious answered, "What? Haven't you ever heard of ghost writers?" The moral of the story? Leave it to someone with a PhD to figure things out. WSJ here. Because of the pandemic, I'm getting kicked out of my regular studio, so I won't be able to make any YouTube videos for a while. So this is going to be a quick and dirty video because I'm able to sneak into the whisper room for half an hour. So it's going to be a little rough. It's going to be a little unprofessional. Haha, yeah, I know. All my stuff is a little rough and unprofessional. This is more so. Please, if you are a subscriber, please don't cancel me. I will get some new materials up as soon as I can get back in the studio. And in the meantime, I will re-release some older materials that are currently not available on my channel. So, if you're a subscriber or a new listener, please check out some of my earlier stuff. And I will be back with you all as soon as I can, because making these videos and interacting with you people is the greatest, it's the greatest tonic for me in this time of sickness. So without further ado, here comes the DB. And what's a DB? You will find out. The DB. Most people get their news online these days. But back in the day, a newspaper was exactly that. A folded paper, black, white, and red all over. And that's what we got our news from, the newspaper. Now, in the early 70s, there were brightly colored metal boxes for newspapers. Red for the sun, blue for the star, and they could be found everywhere on street corners, near stores, etc. They were ubiquitous. Now, how's that for a big word? Ubiquitous. You can look it up. Now, in the really early 70s, there were no lids on these open boxes, so you could just reach in and help yourself. Sure, there was a slot for the dime. Yeah, in 1971, a newspaper cost a dime, which was the price of the newspaper back then, and a little sign which encouraged payment with the words, "Play fair with the operator." But a lot of people just helped themselves. Ed and Rolly never played fair, and would turn up almost every night at Horny Tim's to drink coffee, read the papers, particularly the one they had nicknamed the Scandal Sheet. It was full of racy stuff, pretty girl on page 3, that kind of stuff, and lots of crime news, and they especially liked the crime articles. Now, the early 70s was a golden or silver age of murder and mayhem. Manson, the Zodiac, Dean Kroll, Seattle Ted, Wayne Bowden. There were all kinds of bank robberies. Ed and Rolly would sit at the counter or at a corner table and pore over the articles amid a barrage of cynical laughter and rude remarks. Now, this is another sign of ancient times. A small sign hung behind the counter asking patrons to limit their stay to 20 minutes. Yeah, this wasn't the day before Wi-Fi. Be lucky to get some of those people out in 20 hours. Anyways, limit your stay for 20 minutes. And Ed and Rolly were masters at ordering a refill or another honey cruller every 20 minutes or so in order to keep the old bags behind the counter from throwing them out. And it worked most of the time. Most of the time. But one cold, crappy night in mid-March, it didn't work at all, which is how Ed and Rolly found themselves trudging down King Street in a light but chilling rain. Now, every town in Canada has a King Street and a Queen Street, too. This particular King Street ran along the shore of the lake and was separated from the road by a narrow strip of dirt and shingle. Rolly had his head down in a vain effort to hide from the rain, but Ed affected to wear an English-style Cambridge cap, and so was looking around, which is why he spotted it. Now, this particular stretch of lake wasn't far from Hamilton Harbor, where gangster Rocco Perry disappeared from Steeltown on April 23, 1944, and when he did, his body was supposedly dumped there, in Hamilton Harbor, Lake Ontario. This was a case that fascinated them, a Canadian gangster being taken for a ride, and just like Chicago, and dumped in the lake wearing cement overshoes. And Rolly often joked that one of these nights, a DB's going to drift ashore. A DB, a dead body. And there was one there now, a great gray-white bulk, on the shoreline, and half in and half out of the water. "There's a DB washed up," Ed said. "Yeah," came the soggy and indifferent response. "Look," Ed yelled, grabbing Rolly's arm. It was the corpse of a man, or what had once been a man. Stocky, middle-aged, but it was hard to be sure. Yeah, it was hard to be sure, because the corpse was bloated from decomposition, and it didn't smell too good, even on a cold night, even at a distance, even with a refreshing but chilly rain. "You think he was murdered?" Ed asked, but Rolly just shrugged. "It's all the same to him now." "Ed, should we call the cops?" Rolly, "I don't want to get involved." "Ed, but it's our civic duty." In the end, they made a call from a phone booth on the Lakeshore Road. Now, in those days before 911 operators, the call was picked up by the desk sergeant. Ed covered his mouth with his handkerchief in an attempt to disguise his voice. Something like this. "I'd like to report a dead body." "I'd like to report a dead body," he said quietly. There was a pause. Then the sergeant barked, "Is this a gag?" Ed hadn't expected such a response, so he mumbled and stumbled through, "No, there's a real dead body there, middle-aged man. Well, I think he's been murdered." "Is this a gag?" "No, it's true." "Yeah, honest," Ed concluded weakly as he hung up the phone. When Rolly wanted to know what the cop had said, Ed had to admit, "I don't think he believed me." So Rolly tried, and when the sergeant tried to ask him if this was a gag, he was told, "No, there's a body of a murder victim been washed up, and you don't want some rich old lady walking her dog to stumble over it, so you better come and pick it up. Now." And he slammed down the receiver. "That's the way to talk to Jokeville's finest," he crowed. "We'd better get out of here," Ed said. "I don't want them to know it was us." "Well, let's go back and watch the fun." "Where the body is?" "Yeah." "What if they see us?" "Hey, what if they do? We're just a pair of honest citizens out for a stroll." During a rainstorm. So they returned to the scene of the crime, but the DB was gone. Ed was completely shocked and began sputtering, "It's gone! It's gone! It must have floated off." But Rolly stayed phlegmatic. How's that for another good word? Phlegmatic. How could it have floated away? It's raining, but the lake is dead calm. Are we in the wrong place? Nah. We're in the right spot. Well, then where the hell is it? The dead can't walk, can they? Rolly didn't have a snappy answer to that. Instead, he shrugged and said, "We'd better make ourselves scarce." They were halfway back to Lakeshore Road when they heard the first shot, followed by a volley of small arms fire. Now, sensible people run away at the sound of gunfire. But Ed and Rolly weren't sensible. They reached the Lakeshore Road, not far from the phone booth they'd used to report the DB. The night was hideous with sirens, and a block away, a patrol car, red light flashing, was pulled up half onto the sidewalk. One patrolman lay sprawled across the pavement. He looked dead. A second cop sat on his butt by the open door of the cruiser, his head in his hands as he babbled. A crowd from the nearby bars had gathered around, but Ed and Rolly were able to get close enough to hear him say, "It was all wet. It was all wet and glistening, and it was dead, but it was walking, and it got George. It got George. Bullets won't stop it. Bullet won't stop it. But it's dead. It's dead." Several cop cars plus the Black Maria converged on the scene, and the crowd was quickly dispersed The patrolmen looked angry and frightened, and they had their guns in their hands, so no one argued, not even Rolly. They made the long walk away, heading west on Lakeshore Road, speculating, and truth be told, looking nervously around. "You don't honestly think it was the DB?" Ed kept saying over and over. And Rolly kept answering, "What else could it have been?" "Maybe we've all gone mad," he's chortled. "I've long suspected it." They parted at Kerr, and Ed began the long walk up to his apartment building. He went straight up Kerr, where it was fairly well lighted, and he was happy to have police cars pass him every block or two. Nothing happened, but sometimes he was sure he could see he could hear a wet squelching sound from somewhere behind him. But when he looked for the source of the wet squelching sound, there was nothing there. Another time, Ed was engulfed by wafts of fetid stench, which made him think of the corpse and made him pick up his pace. Ed's mother worked the graveyard shift at Ford and was usually gone by the time he got home. Generally, he enjoyed having the place to himself, but tonight he would have liked to have found her home. It was not a night to be alone. Still, he felt a sense of relief and release, but relief first, primarily. He felt a sense of relief when he unlocked the front door of the apartment and stepped into the pitch-dark hallway. It was the smell which hit him, the smell of something dead, the corpse smell, here in the apartment. He reached out for the light switch, his hand shaking almost uncontrollably, found it and flicked it on. Nothing there. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just the front hall and the kitchen directly in front of him. "Mom?" he called out. "Mom?" he called out, his voice an unsteady falsetto. "Mom?" There was no answer, but he could hear water running in the shower of the bathroom off to his right. Ed felt his bowels clench from intense hammering fear and knew he should leave right now. Run away. Run as fast as you can. But this is a horror story after all. Besides, what if it was his mother in there and she was sick or something? So he walked like a zombie over to the bathroom door. "Mom!" "Mom!" he called. No answer. Just the sound of the shower hissing. Ed pushed open the door. The lights were out. Out? Quickly, he turned them on. The small bathroom was filled with steam, and it was very, very hot. The mist was so thick, it was several seconds before he could see clearly. But when he was able to focus, he could see a dark silhouette. Someone was in the shower. A dark shape, someone just standing there. "Mom, Mom," he called for the third time. He didn't expect an answer, and when none came, he stepped forward and pulled back the shower curtain and was instantly engulfed in foulness and spray. The DB stood in the shower. In life it had been a short, stocky, middle-aged man, but now it was bloated and distorted, the dead white, decomposing body inflated by foul gases on the verge of exploding, the face rotting and falling in, the jaw hanging open in a rictus of a smile. It was smiling at him, and then it reached out and grabbed him. Ed woke to find himself in the shower, his clothes soaking wet. Oh, hope that's not the virus. Ed woke to find himself in the shower, his clothes soaking wet. Pools and puddles of water were all over the apartment, the kitchen, the living room, the bedrooms, and the whole place smelled like shit. He stripped butt naked and cleaned up everything as best he could before falling into bed. He was sick for a week, with a high fever, the chills, and recurring nightmares of something in the shower. When he finally made it back to school, the first thing he did was find Rolly. The DB was in our apartment. The what? The DB. The dead body. Huh? You know, the dead body we found on the shore along King Street there. The one that got up and walked and attacked the cops. I don't know what you're talking about, Rolly said, looking at him like he was nuts. Rolly had no memory of the incident, although he conceded it was a good story. And when he checked, Ed found no mention of anything unusual in the local news rag, and certainly no mention of any cops being attacked or murdered. So in the end, he was forced to reluctantly conclude he'd dreamed the whole thing up, a hallucination, part of the fever which had struck him down. But Ed had changed. He stayed home nights, avoided the lake as much as possible, and he avoided Rolly too. And as soon as he could, he moved as far from water as he could find. Saskatchewan. And as the years went past, the fear left him, and he forgot about the DB, and was even able to look at water with equanimity. You certainly learn a lot of great words from this, although I don't think I pronounced that one correctly. Equanimity. Ed was an old man now, and one sunny afternoon in early spring, he sat down to rest on a park bench overlooking Lake Wascana and the Legislative Building in Regina, and promptly fell asleep. But he dreamed he was in a small bathroom filled with steam and very, very hot. There was someone in the shower, a dark shape, someone just standing there, and he pulled back the curtain. It may have been the smell, the sickening odor of decomposition which woke him up. But when he shudderingly opened his eyes, the DB was sitting next to him, its mouth open in a rictus of a smile, as it whispered, "Remember me." The Evening News reported the discovery of a DB, a dead body, floating face down in Lake Wascana. Ed. E-D-D-B. The end. WSJ here. Well, this was my quick and dirty attempt to do a YouTube video recording in about 20 minutes without editing, so it's just a quick and dirty job. But I wanted to get one final video out before I get kicked out of my regular YouTube studio where I make these videos. I don't know for how long I will be away from the studio, but if you've subscribed, please hang in there with me. I'll get back and start producing some new material as soon as I'm able. And if you haven't, please check out some of my earlier videos. As well, I've had a number of videos that I've removed from the channel over time. And as time goes along, I will be re-releasing some of them for your viewing pleasure once or twice a week. So, I wish you all well. Stay healthy out there. Stay hungry. You know, if you feed a cold, you starve a fever. And let's all stay well, stay subscribed, and I will see you as soon as this crisis is over. God bless you all, and take care.